All right. Hi, guys. This is Brennan from Analysis. And today we have a video for you on New Year's Day of 2017. So happy 2017. About predicting meta and what meta is, how you use it, and one of the ways that you can try and guess at what other teams are going to be capable of doing. So a little bit about me. Once again, I said I'm Brennan. I have been in First and Vex for about 10 years now, and I started in First League in 2006, where we were a internationally successful team there, and moved to FRC in 2009 and VRC in 2010. I currently mentor Team 4476, the Waffles, and to kind of give you a context, I had all different kinds of roles on the drive team. So, human player, driver, operator, and coach. So, I've been I've been around the field a lot, and on the field, off the field, doing strategy stuff. And I am 4476's kind of head strategy mentor. So, a little bit about me. Regionally, I kind of have a little chart for you guys, I guess, so that you kind of know what regions I mainly follow and what I kind of understand, to kind of give you an idea of how this is sort of ranked. Is 5 out of 10 would be knowing about the top 8 teams in the region really well, and having a general idea of what the others are. So I do follow other regions pretty extensively, more so than a large number of people. But then again, there are a lot of regions that I really don't know that much about. So this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of where my experience comes from, and that I do follow a large kind of spread of teams, pool of teams. All right. So a little bit more about me. I've was doing some of the math and estimation for about how many matches I watched of Stronghold, which is a little over 1,000. Basically, watch every week during build season or competition season. Watch week 0. Watch pretty much all the major off-season events and all limbs from champs and stuff. So put some serious time into it to be able to understand and get better at doing strategy, predicting meta, and knowing which teams are good, which teams are not as good. I am involved in Fantasy First, so I end up rewatching a lot of matches, and when we're making our picks, seeing who's good, who's kind of a underdog team. I think as a total, I've watched about 6,000 matches over my entire FRC career-ish, which is like 7 years. So 7 years of being on a team. As for game understanding, I've what I call a beyond meta understanding of the games from 2014 to 2016. So what I mean by beyond meta is like beyond what the meta kind of called for, what the highest levels were, IRI, Chessy Champs, World Championships, understanding that the points that those alliances could have improved on. That's kind of what I classify that as. And a competent understanding of 2008 to 2013. So understanding why they did what they did, but not really understanding of anything that, or not very much that they could have improved on. And some understanding of 2003 to 2007. So just general concept of what's good and bad, but definitely not extensive by any means. So, what is this presentation anyways? Well, it's to help you guide you through your upcoming season, Steamworks, at for 2017. So it's a method that you guys could use to predict what you think other teams are going to be capable of, and what you expect week to week to week. And a big part of modeling is constantly adjusting based on what information you have. So every week you kind of, after every competition, you kind of readjust, see where you're at, and see where you expect certain teams to be at. The kind of another goal of mine is to just improve strategy as a whole, worldwide, and get more people interested in strategy and scouting and the fun things you do because of that. And hopefully by getting more people interested and thinking about improving their game even more, that these teams will, when we come up to, play with them, us or anybody, we see higher quality matches and people who understand the game better. We're going to talk a little bit about meta changes. We're going to be using the 2016 season as an example, and going to talk about defense and how that evolved, the different types of defense, and which ones popped up first, why, and which ones are better at a higher level. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the kind of glaring obvious things: capture reliability, defense placement, and where the meta never reached. So what things could have still been improved. So to talk a little bit about why this is even useful, to be a top team, or like to shore up some of your weaknesses, even if you're not like a top team, like, you're a mediocre team, the more you understand the game, the better you will do. The robot changes are a lot easier to make. It's easier to make a good choice at the beginning of the season and make changes. So you decide you're going to build a helicopter day 1, and then day 2 you realize, probably building a helicopter is not a great idea. But the strategy stuff is a lot easier to implement late into the season. So if you have a really good understanding of the strategy late into the season, well, you can execute better with the robot that you have. And if you have a good understanding of the strategy and where it's going to go at the beginning of the season, then you can make more educated decisions on how your robot's going to be designed, what kind of functions you want to have it do. So, and understanding what kind of opponents / partners you're going to have is very useful. So, talking about meta. So meta is, for some of people who don't really know what this word means, and I've been talking a little bit about it, basically what it is the generally accepted way to win a match or do well. So what I mean by that is to win a game of Stronghold. I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with that game. The meta might have started off with we want to score more boulders in the goal than the other team. And this is pre-week 1, week 0. We want to score more boulders than the other guys and cross more defenses than the other guys. And that will be the path for us to success. While that's kind of true on a basic level, scaling upwards, there's definitely a lot more detail that can go into that. So the meta is kind of what that is, that explanation of how to win, how to do well. Understanding this year's meta is going to help for next year because, well, for a few reasons, right? You're going to be developing your meta skills and being able to kind of understand the patterns and the trends that we see, and you're going to be able to start classifying teams, which we're going to see is super important, and I'll talk a bit about later. To be a world-class team, you have to worry about the meta. I mean, even if you're number one, number two team, you have to really think about if you're the number one team, you have to think about what the number two team is going to try and do to try and beat you, right? So, or if you're the number two team, how are you going to beat the number one team? What kind of strategy, what kind of edges can you get out of? A lot of teams focus on like mechanical stuff, which is really good with the cheesecaking and the constant improvement that we've been seeing, really resonating with the community recently, and that's really good. But that's only like one part of it. I mean, there's a whole part of like strategy and scouting, which people have possibly been neglectful of more so than I would like, and that's kind of what I want to point out by doing this. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to talk about, right, is regional biases. So there are different metas. It's important that there's different metas for your different region, right? So just because something's happening in Ontario that, everybody's going for high goals, and if you don't go high goals, you lose. That could be interpreted from Ontario, because we have really strong like high goal shooters, and it's really hard to not win without shooting high goal. Other regions like Mar last year, you would see a lot less high goaling and a lot more low goaling, or even in Pacific Northwest also. You see a lot of like low goaling aside from a few teams, and teams would get really good at controlling balls and making sure that they're starving balls and stuff like that. So we saw a lot of that. But they're two kind of different metas depending on which teams there are, and it even like compounds on itself, right? So once the meta starts going in one direction, it'll continue going in that direction for the most part. You won't usually see some complete reversal where like the meta is like, oh, let's only score high goals, to, oh, let's only score low goals. As you get later into the season, I mean, you could see some of that stuff happen like week one or something, like midway through week one, people are realizing that their high goal shooter's not as good, so they just need to low goal. That's normal, but you wouldn't see that happening at like week 5, week 6, or champs. You wouldn't see teams going, oh, well, we're just not going to score high goals anymore because XYZ. The other thing that I really wanted to point out too is like teams and people need to follow multiple regions to really understand this. So they exist. You can learn something from other people's metas because in general they bring out good things, like really good aspects that aren't as prevalent in other regions. Like I was saying with ball control, ball starving, we maybe didn't see that as much in Ontario as we could have, as we did like with Mar or PCH or Pacific Northwest. So each region kind of has its strengths, and if you can't just like say, oh, well, this team doesn't have 11-14, this team doesn't have, or this region doesn't have 254, this region doesn't have 148, this region doesn't have 359. Well, let's just ignore them. I mean, like, look at Israel. And if you watch Israel, or if you watch Australia, even if it's like lower quality, you can kind of understand how to win with like weaker partners. There's always something that you can learn from even a weak event, and I feel like a lot of people kind of just either focus on their own region or only like the super well-known, like Ontario, Michigan, and California, Texas, basically. So, but every region is worth looking at and watching and understanding from. So, how do you understand what the meta is? Now that we know what the meta means, how do you learn? How do you figure out what it is? Well, I mean, a lot of people, basically the easiest way is to go to Chief Delphi and read posts or watch web shows like this one, like GameSense, like Fun, like F4. Um, all those shows kind of attempt to bring experts in that will try and educate you about, hey, this is what's happening. This is the new thing. They'll bring in high prominent mentors and try and talk about like how they got their regional win, what they learned from their region, what they were surprised by, that kind of stuff. And that's also like that's useful stuff. But it definitely can't end there if you want to be like a super high level team, or even if like I said, if you're a mediocre team and if you want to get to like the good team, like make that step up to being just a good team, like that is one of the ways that you can do that. And it's not as complicated as people think it is. It's actually pretty simple, and we'll talk about how to do that. You want to look at all regions of play. I can't stress this enough. Don't just focus on your region, and don't focus on just the elite regions. Like actually take the time, go watch the finals matches of every single event. It's going to take an hour or two, but you'll probably, well, I can guarantee you'll come up with something that's like, oh wow, I didn't think of that, and you'll learn something. So watch all the finalist matches at least. Like that's a really easy way to understand what's happening and what the current trends are and who's ahead, who's behind, or maybe they're going to two different directions. So going back to the categorization, and kind of before we jump right into the method that I use is, this is the first time I've really like created, like wrote it down, or like came up with a clear-ish way to explain what I'm doing. Hopefully it makes sense to you guys. It's not that complicated, but it's not the only way to do this, and the way that I actually do it is slightly different than the way that this is. It's kind of a simplified, slightly more dumbed down version, just so you can kind of understand the concepts. And then in the presentation, I'll just talk a little bit about what you can do to kind of like boost it up to what I do. So to best model, basically we categorize teams because every team is unique. Every team is, if you tried to predict every single team, you'd be lost, because there's like 3,000 teams or something. And depending on your region, like if you're in Indiana, you have like 50 teams. If you're in Michigan, you have like 450. So you have even 50 teams is pretty ridiculous to try and do individually. So you kind of classify teams into specific categories. So into the actual method. It's actually very simple. So what I do is group teams into categories. Here are 5 categories that make sense to me that I kind of put together as kind of an example. There may be more, there may be less, but this is kind of the general number. And I kind of have a group name for them and kind of a description about what they are, just so that you guys can kind of remember what they sort of are. So group 1 in general is like the highest level, and group 5 is usually like the latest to the party, I guess, when it comes to like strategic thinking. So group 1 is the trendsetters, and they are actually creating the game meta. So what that means is when they attend an event, they're coming up with new ideas that are better than the old ideas in how to play the game. So if you're the first team to think of and execute ball starving, like that would be a trendsetter. You look at teams who are bowling over defenses. Those teams are we're in that trendsetter category at the time. Now they may have slowed down after that because it's not static per se, but these are the teams that are actually like making decisions and saying, okay, we're going to implement this new strategy. So the second group is what I call the investigators. So these are the people who actually observe live or via streams or at the events and are adapting. So not necessarily their event, but they're putting in the extra time to go watch other events, to kind of watch the trendsetters and be like, hey, look, that team's bowling over the defenses. Like, let's try and do the same thing. How is it possible? Oh, they're curving the ball. All right, let's get our human player practicing that kind of thing. So that's the investigators. Third group is Chief Delphiers. So these are the people. So generally, what will happen is either the group 1 or group 2 will post something on Chief Delphi and will be like, hey, I noticed this, or hey, we're doing this. And the Chief Delphi's are the people who read the perceived meta from either group 1 or 2 on Chief Delphi, on web shows, stuff like that. So generally when the meta is like officially meta when it hits group 3. Kind of Chief Delphi is kind of like the cutoff in general of like what would be considered like a well above average team to like a good team. There are very few teams who actually go on Chief Delphi. I know it seems like maybe let me clarify that. So like the percentage of teams that are actually like reading Chief Delphi is like way lower than people think. While there seems like there's a lot of teams that are actively reading it, I wouldn't be surprised if like less than 30% are reading Chief Delphi. So I don't think there's a huge number of people actually from multiple teams that are like strategy related reading these threads. So if you're in group 3, you're really good. Observationists, which are the people who actually are observing at their event. They don't read Chief Delphi. They don't read or they don't watch other events. They just kind of show up to their event and they're like, "Oh man, we should do that," based on whatever somebody else is playing. And then group 5 is reactionists, which are basically the teams that don't do any of those things. They just kind of, you'll go into the pre-match discussion or whatever, and, a team will tell them, hey, by the way, it's good to throw boulders over or roll boulders over the defenses. If that's possible, you guys can do that. Now, that's maybe a bad example because, that's something that takes practice, but you get the kind of idea. They only make changes when they're specifically told. So, going down, the kind of second chart we have is kind of steps behind. This will make sense in a sec. But in general, investigators are about 2 steps behind the trendsetters. Group 3 is 3 steps behind Group 1. Group 4 is 5.5 steps behind 1. Group 5, 8.5 steps behind 1. And you can do the math to, get the difference between 5 and 4 or whatever. But in general, there's the Chief Delphi people who are like reading that kind of stuff. They're not like huge amounts of meta steps behind, but they are still behind, and there's still stuff that they can improve on. The other thing that's really important to emphasize here is that just because you may fall into group 1, like the groups are kind of like ranked by like the highest level that they achieve, right? So group 1 in general, like people who are actually making the meta don't just like ignore other events and don't read Chief Delphi. And, group 1 people will watch other events and they'll read Chief Delphi and they'll watch their event and adapt, and they'll listen to other teams if they have suggestions. So in order to be a good team, you really want to be doing all 5 of these things. But they're pretty much everybody will do 5, but not very many teams will do like group 1 stuff. So getting into actually doing it. We're going to do this for the Stronghold season. First we're going to do is we're going to figure out what the core like scoring objectives are. So these aren't actually part of the meta category or like the meta steps, which are like scoring high goal, scoring low goal, hanging, stuff like that. It's deeper than that, what you want to be writing down, and we'll go over that in a sec. You want to be saying things like shooting from X, Y, Z, shooting from the batter, shooting from the middle of the zone, shooting from the outerworks, so you're safe, that kind of stuff. So don't actually like list scoring objectives. Talk about how those scoring objectives are actually completed. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to start from the very bottom, the very basic, most like key need of doing well at Stronghold, and then kind of building on that. So basically what you want to do is you want to say, okay, what's the like core task that we want to be able to do? And then say, okay, so if I were on an alliance that was doing this, or that was playing against this, like whatever the strategy was, how would I beat them? And then once you come up with something, then you say, okay, well, so if I were now playing against the alliance that I just beat, or like that I just came up with, how to beat that? And you continue until you eventually come up with, kind of the ideal strategy. And this kind of goes a few different ways, right? So we either have like an eventual, like, yes, this is the best. We're absolutely 100% sure that this is like the best way that you can play this game. Or what happens is like, it becomes like a rock, paper, scissors thing. Like rock will beat scissors, but will lose to paper. And scissors will beat paper, but lose to rock, kind of thing. So, depends on the game and how you actually work things out. Then what you can do is once you have that whole list, then you can set where the meta is. So that's kind of identifying the meta in general. It's kind of what's on Chief Delphi, what's generally being accepted on Chief Delphi or shows, and you kind of place that there. And then what you do is classify each team, or like team in your region or the team that you care about, into one of those 5 groups based on what you've seen from them. And you get a general idea of where they should be based on where the current meta is. So, I mean, if you're classifying a team like 1114 or 2056, you put down the meta and you say, okay, 3 steps up on average. And then would be like, okay, so they're probably going to be at this level of execution. They may be more aware of like better strategies, but they might not be, they probably won't be able to execute that well, because in general the whole alliance needs to be on the same page. And especially if you have a group 5 team on your alliance, it's really hard to execute when they're not as caught up to speed. Also, this model gets better as the season goes on, because generally there's a large improvement at the beginning of the season when people are just figuring out how to play. Normally people's first plays aren't that great, and when they go on to their second play, they're generally start to level out their performance. So this specific model is better the later you go on. So now, just before we jump into actually doing it here, I do want to say that the way that I actually do it, like fully, this is kind of like as I mentioned, this is like a simplified version. The simplified version, like, there's no like average steps really that are perfect. It's an approximation. So what you kind of need to do is you need to classify the teams. You should be able to figure out like who are the top teams in my region and how do they compare globally-ish, and then you should be able to classify them. You probably have at least one or two team ones or group ones in your region. So take those teams, use that as your base, and you can kind of readjust the steps behind slightly to figure out where everybody is. The other thing is there might be actually more than 5 groups. The 5 groups are just approximations, as I said. There could be 6 or 7, or there could be 4 or 3. Usually there's more because there's more diversity, and in general, the five is maybe even selling it a little bit short with how many different kind of like levels there are of teams. So it's kind of up to you to readjust this as you go, but the whole concept of like writing down the logical steps of like first comes this, in order to beat this, you play this, in order to beat that, you play this, that stays the same. So we will move that to that now. So here we have a example that I put together in about 20 minutes, and I'll kind of go through it with you guys. I didn't show the entire process because that would have been adding a whole bunch of time, but basically this is what it is, right? So we're adding our meta steps, trying to predict which strategy is the best, and breaking it down into small number parts as possible. So when we're just looking at the very basic thing, you want to start with the simplest and most easy thing to execute, which could be argued that it's a breach. Most robots that can drive can probably complete a breach, so this is kind of like the number one objective to start off with, and then we continue on with breaching, then low goaling. So like completing your breach, and then doing all like as many low goals as you can. Breach, then high goal midfield. So midfield being kind of in the middle of the courtyard, shooting kind of unprotected, and then breach and low goaling. So doing breach plus low goal cycles. But as you can see, continues on a whole bunch. For the most part, in this example, the early stuff is pretty unfleshed out. It's not super detailed, but I did put a little bit more into the end with ball starving stuff and 6 ball strategies, creating loops to make sure that you're getting the maximum amount of points, and making sure that you're getting that loop as quickly as possible. More so than just outscoring your partner. Or your, not your partner, your opposing alliance. So once you have this, basically flesh it out as much as you possibly can and continue to flesh it out. Expand, look at all the different aspects that go into what makes a top, like what makes the strategy possible. And then what I have here is kind of just the outline for each of the groups and how many steps they are behind on average. Once again, this is kind of like just the guideline. If you really want to make the most use of this kind of method, you kind of have to, it depends on the game slightly also, so you want to evaluate where those teams are actually fitting in. Maybe after first week, you might find, okay, so the teams, the meta being 3, team, like the number 5 team is actually like, more than 5 steps behind them. They could be, 6, 7, 8, something like that. It really depends, and adjust based on that. So what we can do is it should be, as we talked about earlier, it's pretty easy to figure out what the meta is, just by watching shows and looking at Chief Delphi. So if we look at the end of 2016, what ended up being fairly meta is around here, which is breach, high goal outerworks, hanging, rushing center balls, and courtyard defender. Actually, even more so. Actually, we have that's good. That's good. So, making sure that their ball control is good, and courtyard defender was pretty common, and obviously high goal outerworks, hanging were definitely the clear favorites for executing at high level That's not saying that all robots had to be Outerworks shooters, but that was there were more top teams that were doing well with Outerworks, slightly more than the batter shots or like pseudo batter shots. And then what you can do is it automatically will lay out your stuff, so you'll see that probably the highest level that anybody can execute is Secret Passage, Ball Starve, capture block, so blocking captures, keeping the person who's in your courtyard defending in your courtyard and unable to capture, and rushing center balls, same thing, executing Death Circle, which is like the 6-ball thing, and breach and high goal midfield, which is not perfectly ideal. Outerworks is right here, but as you can see, it's sort of flexible. But the real benefit of this is you have an approximation of where everybody's going to be, and it forces you to really break down the game into small sections. So once you break it down into all these different elements, you really understand what elements are most important and which ones are not as important. You really understand the game a lot better, because there's more to scoring high goals than just scoring high goals, and this can be like broken up into even more points. But yeah, hopefully that gives you guys a general idea of a method to predict how the meta will evolve. And actually, before we finish up, like, say that this wasn't the final 2016-ish meta, then you would expect maybe the next week we'd start seeing the meta shift up to here or something, where you can just slide the whole thing up, like 2 slots, and then you can see what these guys are looking at, and etc. So yeah, and I mean, not all of these things are perfectly organized, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's to give you an idea. The more you spend time on your model, the better you'll understand the game, and the better you'll be able to kind of guess at what specific tiers of robots will be capable of. So yeah, hopefully that taught you guys something and was interesting. I'm always keen for feedback. This is my first time really, like I said earlier, kind of getting this whole concept out in the way that I do it, in a more formalized way. So I expect that we'll probably do some additions, and as I learn how to do things better, like improve the method, and maybe we'll do another video on this in the future of better ways to do it, or a better way to explain it. So thanks for your time, guys. Analysis will be back probably with a video just after kickoff talking about the game, and then we'll be having weekly shows during the competition season. So we'll be covering a whole bunch of stuff there, and that'll be all good and exciting. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and